Hello everyone, this is just an opportunity for us to do a little graphing practice review today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Dry mix. So what is dry mix? It's an acronym to identify the independent and dependent variables and their axes. So dry stands for D stands for dependent, the dependent variable. R stands for responding, and that is the thing that responds to changing the variables. And the Y stands for the Y-axis. So the Y-axis is where the dependent variable should be plotted on a graph. Mix, the M stands for manipulated, the variable that we purposely change. It's what we're trying to discover or do an experiment on. I stands for independent, the independent variable. And X stands for the X-axis is where the independent variable should be plotted. What does the D in dry mix stand for? So go ahead and answer this question now. Experimental scenario number 1. A student investigated whether ants dig more tunnels in the light or in the dark. She thought that ants use the filtered light that penetrated the upper layers of the earth and would dig more tunnels during the daytime. 10 ant colonies were set up in commercial ant farms with the same number and type of ants per farm. The same amount of food was given to each colony, and the colonies were in the same temperature. 5 of the colonies were exposed to normal room light, and 5 were covered with black construction paper, so they did not receive any light. Every other day for 3 weeks, the length of the tunnels was measured in millimeters using a string and a ruler. Averages for the light and dark groups for each measured were then computed. So what would be the independent variable in this scenario? Okay. Hopefully you see that there's 2 different things. We're talking about light, the amount of light, and we're talking about the length of the tunnel. So which one of those would be the independent variable? Now, what axis should the independent variable go on? So that independent variable that you just talked about, what axis should that independent variable go on? Think back to dry mix. All right, experimental scenario number 2. A student investigated the effect of radiation on germination of bean seeds. He thought that exposure to radiation would limit the seed's ability to germinate or grow, much like ultraviolet light causing skin cancer. 300 seeds were soaked in distilled water for 1 hour. They were then divided into 3 groups. One group was placed in a microwave oven on high for 3 seconds. Another group was microwaved on high for 6 seconds. The last group was not microwaved. The seeds were then planted in 3 separate flats and given the same amount of water. The flats were placed in a location with a constant temperature of approximately 27 degrees Celsius. Each day for 2 weeks, the number of seeds that germinated each group was recorded. What would be the dependent variable? What's the thing that's responding? Now, in the scenario from before, if the number of seeds germinating is the dependent variable and the amount of microwave radiation is the independent variable, where would you put the number of seeds germinating on this graph? Would you put it on axis A or on axis B? And hopefully you know which is which and what those names of each axis are. Again, think about dry mix. What should the title be? Okay, the title should always be in dry mix order. So if you look at this and you see that the number of seeds germinating is here on the y-axis and the amount of microwave radiation is on the x-axis, what should the title of this graph be? Problem number 3. A student investigated the effect of aged grass compost, fertilizer made from decaying plant material, on the growth of bean plants. She thought that the compost would provide extra nutrients and make plants grow faster. 30 bean seeds were divided into 3 groups and planted in different flats or boxes. All of the seeds germinated after 12 days and were allowed to grow for 5 days. The flats were each given the same amount of water and the same amount of light. Flat A was then fertilized with 3-month-old compost. Flat B was given 6-month-old compost. And flat C was given no compost. At the end of 14 days, the height of each plant was measured in centimeters. So, looking at the graph, think about dry mix and ask yourself, what is the independent variable? Based on what the graph is, what would the independent variable be? Again, looking at the graph, what would the dependent variable be? Okay, so again, remember dry mix and ask yourself which variable is the dependent variable. And finally, looking at the graph, what is the best title? Remember, dry mix. All right, that's all we have for you today. Hopefully, all of this is a good review for you and you are ready to take your test.